They cut the ribbon like it was a celebration. Balloons, banners, smiling faces, right there on land that had my name on it. Bulldozers rolled, streets were paved, and houses rose row by row. Not one. Not 10. An entire town was being built while I stood on the other side of a fence they said I didn't belong behind. When I told them it was my land, they laughed. The HOA president smiled for the cameras and said I was confused. Police told me to leave. Residents recorded me like I was the villain. Every day, another road. Another home. Another sign with a new town name on property I legally owned. I could have shouted. I could have sued immediately. But I didn't say a word. Because while they were pouring concrete, I was gathering proof. And when court day came, I let them talk. I stayed silent until the deed was read aloud in court. If you believe justice should always win over power, drop your country or city in the comments and let's see how far this message reaches. And before we continue, hit like and subscribe. This channel stands for truth, patience, and justice. The land had been in my name long before anyone called this place a community. It wasn't flashy, just acres of open ground, old boundary markers, and survey pins most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking for them. I bought it years earlier, paid the taxes every single year, and kept copies of every document. Deeds. Surveys. County stamps. All of it sat quietly in a folder no one had ever challenged, until the HOA showed up. The Homeowners Association formed fast, backed by developers and smooth-talking board members who promised growth and higher property values. They talked about expansion, infrastructure, a new town vision. Meetings were held. Permits were filed. Maps were redrawn. And somehow, my land was labeled as unused, unclaimed, and conveniently absorbed into their plans. At first, I thought it was a mistake, something a phone call would fix. But the moment I questioned it, the tone changed. I was told I was mistaken. That their records were more recent. That fighting it would be expensive and pointless. Neighbors started repeating what the HOA told them, not what was true. Then the machines arrived. Survey flags disappeared. Fences were moved. Signs went up with a town name I had never approved. I watched trucks roll in and concrete pour across property lines I knew by memory. Still, I didn't interfere. I didn't call the news. I didn't make a scene. Because while they believed paperwork could be rewritten, I knew something they didn't. Some documents don't expire. Once construction was underway, the HOA stopped pretending it was a misunderstanding. Their letters arrived first, thick envelopes stamped with legal language meant to intimidate, not clarify. I was warned to stay off community property. Fines were listed for trespassing. Deadlines were set for compliance with rules I had never agreed to. Each notice carried the same message: you don't belong here anymore. When I ignored the letters, they escalated. A private security vehicle parked at the edge of my land one morning, lights flashing like I'd committed a crime. The guard told me I was standing on HOA property and needed to leave. I pointed to the boundary marker behind him. He laughed and said, "Maps change." Then he radioed it in anyway. The humiliation went public soon after. At a town hall meeting, one I wasn't even allowed to vote in, the HOA president put my name on a slide. She told residents there was a hostile individual trying to disrupt development. When someone asked if I actually owned the land, she smirked and said, "If he did, we wouldn't be here." The room laughed. Phones came out. I became a joke before I became a problem. Meanwhile, the town kept growing. Roads were named. Streetlights installed. A small park appeared where my western boundary used to be. They ran water lines, power lines, and fiber cables, every improvement making it harder to undo what they were doing. I realized something then: they weren't just building houses. They were burying evidence under concrete, betting I'd never be able to reverse it. The HOA knew how to apply pressure without ever touching me. My tax office suddenly questioned my filings. A county clerk told me my parcel number now overlapped with a community zoning plan. Contractors acted like they'd been there forever. Even strangers felt entitled to tell me I was wrong. "Why didn't you stop it?" people asked. "Why didn't you sue sooner?" Because every step they took only strengthened my case. Each letter they sent admitted control. Each fine proved intent. Each permit listed boundaries that contradicted my deed. I documented everything: dates, names, signatures. I let them finish what they started. Let them cut ribbons and take photos. Let them declare victory before the game was over. By the time the HOA filed the lawsuit against me, claiming I was interfering with their land, they were confident. They had numbers. They had momentum. They had a town standing behind them. And they had no idea they'd built it all on paper that didn't belong to them. The lawsuit didn't arrive quietly. It came thick with accusations, stamped urgent, and framed as if I were the aggressor. According to the HOA, I was interfering with lawful development, harassing residents, and attempting to seize property that was never mine. They asked the court for an injunction, one that would permanently bar me from setting foot on land I had paid taxes on for years. The headlines followed fast. Local outlets ran the HOA's version without hesitation. Developer fights lone land claimant. Community threatened by legal dispute. I was painted as an obstacle to progress, a man standing in the way of families and futures. The HOA president appeared on camera, calm and confident, explaining how the association had followed every legal step. She spoke about transparency, about growth, about protecting homeowners. Not once did she mention my name, but everyone knew who she meant. In court, their confidence only grew. Their legal team arrived with rolling cases and oversized maps. They projected zoning diagrams across the wall, layers of color showing streets, parcels, utilities. They presented permits signed by county offices, approvals stamped months before construction ever began. According to their documents, the land had been absorbed into a planned development zone, reclassified for community use. Clean. Orderly. Official. Their attorney argued that even if I once had a claim, it had been superseded by newer filings. He called my deed outdated. Said modern planning sometimes required corrections. The judge listened carefully, nodding as the lawyer spoke. Each nod felt like another brick settling into place, on top of me. When it was my turn to speak, my lawyer stood, and then sat back down. No objections. No counter-arguments. No witnesses. The courtroom murmured. The HOA attorney smirked. The president leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, already relaxed. To them, my silence looked like surrender. They paraded residents to the stand. A young couple talked about the home they'd bought. A retiree described the park he walked every morning. One by one, they spoke about what the town meant to them, about how disruptive it would be to undo what had been built. Their words weren't lies, but they weren't the truth either. The HOA attorney leaned into that emotion. He argued that tearing it all down would be unjust. That the community had relied on county records and HOA assurances. That I was asking the court to punish hundreds of families over a technicality. Then came the moment they thought sealed it. The HOA president herself took the stand. She spoke clearly, confidently, describing how my claims had been reviewed and dismissed long before construction began. She insisted surveys had been conducted, boundaries confirmed, and that no valid private ownership existed within the town's footprint. When asked if she was aware of my deed, she said yes, then smiled and added that it had been evaluated and found irrelevant. That smile lingered as she stepped down. The judge leaned forward and looked at my attorney. Does the defense wish to respond? My lawyer stood slowly. Calm. Unrushed. He didn't raise his voice or gesture dramatically. He simply asked for one thing. Time. Time to submit a single document into evidence. The HOA attorney objected immediately, calling it a delay tactic. The judge considered it for a long moment, then nodded once. You may proceed. My lawyer turned to the clerk and handed over a thick folder sealed with aged paper and county stamps. He didn't explain it. Didn't summarize it. He just made one request that shifted the air in the room. He asked that the document be read aloud in court. And for the first time since the case began, the HOA president's smile disappeared. The courtroom went quiet in a way that felt heavier than noise. Not tense. Not confused. Just still, like everyone sensed something was about to snap. The clerk adjusted her glasses and opened the folder. The paper inside wasn't new. It wasn't glossy or color-coded like the HOA's exhibits. It was thick, slightly yellowed at the edges, stamped and sealed in places modern documents rarely were. She cleared her throat and looked to the judge for confirmation. "Proceed," the judge said. She began to read. At first, it sounded like any other legal description: lot numbers, compass bearings, boundary markers described in distances and angles. But then the words started to land. Coordinates that matched streets everyone in the room recognized. Natural landmarks that no zoning map could erase. A northern boundary that followed the old creek. A western line that cut straight through what was now the town square. The clerk kept reading. Murmurs rippled through the gallery as people pulled out phones, whispering, tracing invisible lines in the air. The judge sat upright now, eyes fixed on the document. The HOA attorney shifted in his chair, flipping through his own files as if the answer might suddenly appear there. When the clerk reached the final paragraph, her voice slowed. "And all land within these described boundaries is hereby conveyed in fee simple, without limitation or reversion, to the named owner and their lawful heirs." She stopped. The room exhaled all at once. My lawyer stood and asked the clerk to read the date. She did. The deed predated every HOA filing, every zoning approval, every permit the association had relied on. It wasn't just older, it was foundational. Then came the final blow. My lawyer approached the screen where the HOA's town map was still displayed. With the court's permission, he overlaid a survey drawn directly from the deed's legal description. Street by street, block by block, the lines matched perfectly. The entire town, every road, every home, every park, sat cleanly inside the boundaries of my land. Gasps turned into stunned silence. The HOA president stood halfway out of her chair before catching herself. "That's not possible," she said aloud before her attorney could stop her. The judge raised a hand. "Sit down," he said sharply. My lawyer didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stated facts. The deed had never been voided. The property taxes had been paid continuously. No lawful transfer had ever occurred. The county's approvals, it turned out, were based on an internal map that mislabeled my parcel as public development land, an error the HOA had been warned about during early surveys and chose to ignore. Emails surfaced. Meeting notes. A consultant's report advising further verification before building. All of it entered into evidence now, piece by piece. The HOA attorney tried to regain control, arguing reliance, good faith, inevitability. The judge stopped him mid-sentence. "You don't build a town on land you don't own," the judge said flatly. That was the moment everything flipped. Reporters in the back began typing furiously. Residents stared at the HOA board members they trusted. The president's face had drained of color, her confidence replaced with calculation, then fear. The judge ordered a recess. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with disbelief. Phones rang nonstop. News vans repositioned. For the first time since construction began, the story wasn't about progress or growth. It was about ownership. And the truth was no longer quiet. When court resumed, the judge's tone had changed. He ruled the deed valid. He ruled the HOA's permits defective. And he ruled that the case would proceed not as an interference claim, but as a matter of unauthorized development on private land. I finally spoke then. Just once. "I never stopped them," I said calmly. "I just let them finish." No one laughed this time. When the judge returned, he didn't waste time. His voice was firm, controlled, and unmistakably final. The courtroom quieted as he began listing his findings, each one landing harder than the last. The HOA's permits, he ruled, were issued based on incorrect land classification. That alone would have halted future construction. But the damage ran deeper. Because the land was privately owned, every road cut, every foundation poured, every utility trench dug without consent constituted unauthorized use. Trespass. On a massive scale. The judge ordered an immediate stop to all HOA-controlled development within the town boundaries. Gasps echoed through the room. He then turned to liability. The HOA, not the county, would bear responsibility for damages. The board had been warned. Survey discrepancies had been flagged. Instead of pausing, they accelerated construction, betting the scale of the project would make it untouchable. That bet had failed. The HOA president tried to speak. The judge cut her off. "You don't get to claim ignorance after ignoring warnings," he said. "And you don't get to profit from land you never owned." With that, the court authorized a full audit of the HOA's actions, financial records, communications, and decision-making processes. Personal accountability was now on the table. Outside, the effect was immediate. Construction crews received cease-work orders before the day ended. Machinery fell silent. Half-finished homes stood frozen, windows open to the wind. Residents gathered in confusion as news spread that the land beneath their homes was in dispute. Some were angry. Others were terrified. Many felt betrayed. The HOA board called an emergency meeting that night. It lasted less than an hour. By morning, resignations began. The president stepped down first, followed by 2 board members named directly in the judge's remarks. Developers withdrew. Insurers pulled coverage. Banks froze accounts tied to the project. The association that had once acted untouchable unraveled in days. Back in court, the final ruling came swiftly. The judge awarded me full recognition of ownership and ordered the HOA to compensate me for unauthorized use, legal costs, and damages. He also mandated that any continued occupation of the land would require formal agreements approved by the court, or removal of structures where agreements couldn't be reached. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. When I walked out of the courthouse, cameras followed. Microphones pushed forward, asking why I stayed silent for so long. I answered honestly. "Because shouting doesn't change paperwork," I said. "Truth does." Behind me, the town they built stood uncertain, no longer a symbol of growth, but a lesson written in concrete. They thought size would protect them. They thought momentum could erase ownership. But land remembers. And so do courts. Weeks later, the dust settled, but the lessons remained clear. The town that had sprung up on my land now stood still, frozen in a strange limbo, streets and houses untouched, but the ownership indisputable. The HOA had crumbled, its leaders replaced or gone entirely, and the community that had cheered them on now faced a truth they couldn't ignore: construction doesn't override the law. Walking across my property, I traced the boundaries of what had been my silent victory. Every tree, every old marker, every patch of grass felt like confirmation that patience, documentation, and truth always win over noise and arrogance. The media had moved on, but the story lingered, proof that even when power seems unstoppable, it can be held accountable. And as I looked across the land they had claimed, I finally allowed myself a small, quiet smile. I had stayed silent when it mattered, and the court had spoken. Justice wasn't loud, flashy, or immediate, but it was undeniable. Some lessons are built to last longer than any town ever could.